quick note before today's episode. While I'm a professor of nursing at the University of Minnesota, this podcast, Midlife Unmasked, is a personal project and separate from my professional responsibilities at the university. This podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered professional medical advice. Please consult your own healthcare provider before making any decisions related to your health and wellness. In keeping with my role as a nurse researcher and educator, I'm here to bring evidence-based information to improve overall health and well-being. It is my goal to be a trusted source of information and to build this community where we can all learn, grow, and share together. With that said, let's jump into today's conversation. Hey Midlifers, welcome to the Midlife Unmasked podcast. I'm your host, Robin Austin, a nurse researcher and educator, and your guide to navigating everything from healthy aging and wellness to big stuff like caring for aging parents, mastering work-life balance, and discovering your next great adventure. So are you ready? Let's do this. Hey Midlifers, welcome to our episode, Menopause and Health Disparities. Today we welcome Dr. Yamnia Cortés, who directs the CortésMenoLab, which promotes the health of women in midlife and beyond through science, community mobilization, education, and policy. Her interdisciplinary program of research is focused on understanding the sociocultural, environmental, behavioral, and biological factors across the lifespan that impact midlife women's cardiovascular health and menopause health disparities. Additionally, Dr. Cortés develops culturally based, community-engaged interventions to improve menopause-related outcomes and reduce cardiovascular disease risk in midlife Latinas. She's also actively engaged in research evaluating the interface between reproductive aging, sleep, and cognitive decline. I'm excited for this episode and can't wait to jump right in. Let's go. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, sharing, and walking this journey with me through season 1. When I first launched Midlife Unmasked, it came from a simple place. I went looking for answers about health, energy, focus, and discovered how little research, language, and support exists for women in midlife. Season 1 was about unmasking what midlife really looks like through science, lived experience, and honest conversation. In Season 2, we go deeper because there's a decade in women's lives where everything starts to change and no one explains why. Sleep shifts, focus fades, energy fluctuates, careers strain, and bodies feel unfamiliar. And we call it normal. But normal doesn't mean harmless. This is the missing decade. The years when women are told to push through while early warning signals are often dismissed, minimized, or ignored. In Season 2 of Midlife Unmasked, it's about naming what's been missing. Not quick fixes, not trends, but language, context, and truth. Because when something isn't named, women assume they're failing, instead of recognizing a system that was never built for them. This season, episodes will drop bi-weekly with companion essays on Substack, where we slow down the conversation and go deeper into the stories, patterns, and questions that don't fit into a soundbite. If you've ever thought, why didn't anyone tell me this? This season is for you. I'm your host, Robin Austin, a nurse researcher, educator, and lifelong advocate for accessible, evidence-based health information. At Midlife Unmasked, we are rewriting the midlife story because the second half deserves a better one. Welcome to Season 2. Welcome. Hey, Midlifers. We are super excited you are here today. And for our amazing guest, Dr. Yamnia Cortés, we are so thrilled you are here today. Thank you again for agreeing to speak with us. As we kind of dive into this episode, I really want the audience to hear your background and just kind of about where you got your start. How did you fall into this area of research? And then just to give us a brief synopsis of what led you to what you're doing today.
Thank you. That's a lot. I won't take too much time to tell you the entire journey. So I think for me, a lot of it was my interest in women's health probably stems from growing up having to translate for my mom at some medical appointments. And then while I was there, typically there were other people that I would help with medical forms or translation as well. And so I just always noticed this need for health providers that spoke Spanish and was also more aware of just different health concerns that I noticed because I grew up in the Bronx, New York, but I also went to school I had gotten a scholarship for private school. And so I kind of lived at the time, it just seemed like two different worlds where I would go and seek, healthcare in my neighborhood. And then when I was in school, noticed kind of like the neighborhood was nicer, the grocery stores were nicer, there were just like lower rates of asthma in the school that I went to versus like in my neighborhood. I felt like all my friends had asthma. And so it was just, I think, a combination of noticing these health disparities, noticing the need for, like I said before, health providers that spoke Spanish. I just became really curious and wanted to understand why these differences existed. So I was always interested in better understanding kind of like public health and health disparities, and then kind of like narrowing down to women's health in particular. And I think it mainly then just became about different opportunities along the way. In college, I had the opportunity to serve as an interpreter for a group of OBGYNs in the Dominican Republic on a medical missions trip. And then I just started bumping into people at the time who were doing work in as nurses and were convincing me how nursing would be a great career for me, individuals that were doing research in health disparities. And then, I'm cutting it short. I'm kind of like abridging a lot of the different things that happened. When I was pursuing my PhD in nursing, my mentor was someone who was doing a lot of work in the menopause field and in midlife women's health. And at the same time, I think I was completing rotations as a student, as a nurse practitioner student in the Bronx. And I was coincidentally seeing a lot of women also in midlife, some transitioning through menopause, but also kind of just new onset of different things that they were experiencing in terms of like diabetes and cardiovascular health conditions. And so I think all these different pieces fit together and led me down this road where I decided to focus on midlife women's health and menopause health disparities.
That's amazing. I think it's so fascinating that what you start off with, not realizing where the road's going to go, but all these things along the way that happen to feel like, oh, this was meant to be the whole time anyway. I just didn't know it at that time. So I love that. I think that's a similar, I think of my trajectory as well. Like you just kind of bump into people that maybe
Yes.
say a small snippet of something that you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I didn't see that, but now I see it. And
Yeah.
so I totally resonate with that as well. And I think a lot of people do as well. So thank you for sharing that. One of the questions that we start off with is within your work, and I think in menopause, we're really realizing how much of it is a whole person perspective. And so we look at the unique blends of biology and psychology, behavior, social cultural factors, all of these components. And so, what have you found that is most often overlooked in how we talk about menopause and cardiovascular health, particularly for Latinas, but then other marginalized groups as well?
I think that there's, like you said, it's a lot of factors and a lot of complexity. And sometimes we try to simplify it by saying one overall message where, like, Latinas are not a homogenous group. And that's just one example because I focus on Latinas. And even though sometimes I do seem to say certain messages from like my research findings as if it's like, oh, this applies to everyone, it does not. And so there are definitely certain sociocultural aspects to consider in terms of how people perceive menopause, what what words different groups use to describe menopause as well, or menopause symptoms, because that changes. But then on top of that, we also have, like, even within all these different groups, it comes to these other factors in terms of socioeconomic status and education. What's your
Mhm.
access to information about menopause? Do you have health insurance? Are you living in an area where you have proximity to providers? Your pregnancy history and how that impacts later health. And so I think it's more complex and there are many factors. And so it's difficult for us to say one message for each of like our populations that we're looking at. And I think that that's why it's important for us to continue to do research among as many people as possible to try to look for the different patterns and develop better individualized education and care for women. So I think that's one thing that I've noticed, that it's just something that we need to continue to study and keep in mind.
That's so important, I think, too. Just in general, we realize the lack of education, just in general, period, across the board. But then, too, really diving down and making it very tailored and personal to different specific groups, because not everything applies to everybody. And one's journey is one's journey. Everybody experiences things very, very differently. And I had some international colleagues that recently just said the same thing to me, that they were just starting to look at things in their country where it's always been perceived as something they didn't talk about whatsoever, or it was just a thing that you had to deal with. And like, it wasn't, you didn't have any medical
Yeah.
assistance, or you didn't talk about it in that light at all. So it was very, very different, even culturally, in different groups as well. So that's
Yeah.
super important, I think, to consider. Like you said, across all groups, we were realizing and recognizing differences in studying that. So yeah, great.
Yeah. Because even in like my own work, I noticed differences. I mean, I grew up in New York. So when we had done focus groups among Latinas in New York, which were mostly Puerto Rican and Dominican, there were some similarities, but there were also differences with focus groups, for example, that we conducted when we were asking women about their thoughts about menopause who were Latinas in North Carolina, and they were mostly Mexican, or identified as Mexican. So you just notice that there's just a lot of different aspects that go into it that will change your perspective. It's like the education, but then also what are the management strategies that you're willing to undertake and things like that.
Exactly. Yep, I would agree. And even I think too, just the idea of what you're open to discussing, I think is part of it as well. And some, like my colleague that I was talking to, she said we just to even get women to talk about it, period, was an issue. And so that's starting to change, I think, with some of the younger generation coming up. But great points. Another question, I think, leading into some of that as well, is you had briefly mentioned about like maybe your former pregnancies or some of the other your life experiences, or maybe your health history earlier on in life.
Hmm.
And so can you share some examples of how earlier life maybe experiences or factors that would potentially impact menopause and even heart health that are surprising that maybe the audience doesn't realize?
Yeah, so there has been some work, but not as much as I think is necessary, where we're linking, for example, pregnancy and menopause.
Mhm.
There's a lot of work, of course, on the pregnancy complications and heart health
Yeah.
during pregnancy and in the postpartum period. And then we have other work that's looking at menopause and midlife and
Mhm.
cardiovascular changes. But there is some that's linking both, where we have seen that potentially women who have experienced maybe like a preterm birth, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes may also be the same women who are experiencing more severe menopause symptoms, or they had higher blood pressure during pregnancy, and then kind of like that risk is unmasked again during the menopause transition and may have higher blood pressure. I'm not wording it as great as I can. I'm kind of trying to simplify it a bit. And so, what are some of the underlying reasons? Are these individuals that you already have like higher risk of cardiovascular disease? And then all the physiological changes of pregnancy are kind of unmasking that risk.
Yep.
That then again, when you're experiencing the hormonal changes of the menopause, the hormonal and physiological changes of the menopause transition, again reemerge that like underlying risk? Or is it also that individuals that are experiencing some of these pregnancy complications are also individuals who have certain social social factors that
Mhm.
are predisposing them? So social and psychosocial, because early adverse childhood experiences, different trauma, socioeconomic status, how all these other factors contribute to the experience of adverse pregnancy complications, and also to differences in menopause symptoms. So I think that there's a lot more to explore there. And then also interesting is when we had done some of this work, when you think about women who are nulliparous, do not, have no children by choice, and then it differs if it's by choice or not. And so some of the work that we had done in the study of women's health across the nation, one of the studies that I had looked at, we tried to kind of determine whether the women were nulliparous by choice, whether or not they reported having tried to have children in the past year and it was that they couldn't. And the women that it seemed like it was by choice because they didn't say that they tried and were nulliparous had higher education, had better health behaviors, and so it was kind of like they had lower odds of that. One of the things that we were looking at were vasomotor symptoms.
Oh, sure.
And then women who had like a gestational hypertension had higher odds of reporting vasomotor symptoms. But then a lot of that difference went away once we started looking at some of those other social factors that I mentioned earlier. So it's a complex picture, but those are kind of like some of the factors. There's also been some work, and I'm trying to remember if we had looked at it or if it was just a thought that I had in terms of like breastfeeding and whether duration of breastfeeding, and if you also saw individuals late in midlife who had breastfed and duration of breastfeeding, and if that still had some sort of protective effect in midlife. So there are a lot of things.
No, it's fascinating. I think too, we're just starting to really uncover so much that could impact this midlife period. And I think it's so fascinating to and just bring awareness to women to say, hey, maybe if you had a preterm birth or you had some complications, gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, things like that during your pregnancy, potentially watch for some of these other changes that may happen or may occur in midlife. It just gives people feel some, I think, control over their own healthcare and some sense of autonomy, all of those things, and agency over potential choices that they can make. And so I think bringing just the awareness of some of that is fascinating. So thank you for sharing that. So one thing that always comes up a lot is sleep. And so how midlife is issues of sleeping, or maybe you slept great and then all of a sudden you're not anymore, or it's always kind of been an ongoing thing. But I know that you're studying some relationships between reproductive aging and sleep and also cognitive decline. So could you share what should midlife women really be knowing about protecting their brain health, especially during this menopause transition?
So I think this is another aspect where there are multiple factors involved. It's not like... So I think one thing is I don't want women to be scared because you will, we know women are experiencing, difficulty concentrating, forgetfulness. We have like 2/3 of women that report, right? I might have my statistics wrong, but we have a large number.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there are many that, those you may return back to your baseline during the postmenopausal period. A lot of this may be due to, yes, hormonal changes, but also lack of sleep or difficulty sleeping, which impacts cognition, or mood. If you're experiencing more depressive symptoms, that also will impact your cognition. So I don't want necessarily women to be afraid that this means that they will have dementia or Alzheimer's later in life, because there are many other factors. I think the other interesting thing is, and this is like some of the work by Dr. Rebecca Thurston and Pauline Mackey related to, vasomotor symptoms. And I think that there's some other things to consider that are not aside from the hormonal changes, but that there might be this link between individuals who are experiencing more vasomotor symptoms and how that impacts or may be related to cognition. And again, when you're thinking about that, that's also, individuals who experience more vasomotor symptoms, hot flashes, are also at elevated risk for cardiovascular disease. And so I think when we start to think about these cognitive changes and going back to thinking about vasomotor symptoms and hot flashes, sometimes there are these underlying just like cardiovascular risk factors and other factors that, if we are thinking through some behavioral and lifestyle factors as well, can help with cognition later in life. But I can't really make any definitive answers because this is something that we're still studying. So that's one of the reasons where I'm just like, don't be scared. Don't think that it means that you're going to, get dementia, a lot of people will return to baseline, but we do have more work to think about. And also thinking about what I was mentioning in terms of sleep and depressive symptoms, and that there are these other factors related to it.
Yeah. And I think too, as you know, menopause is having a major movement. And so I think talking about all these potential connections, like you said, can bring about some fear in women. And like maybe they didn't realize these things before. And now we're talking about it often. And so I think it's also it bringing in awareness that these are potential connections, but at the same time, there's much more research to discover. And we're just starting to, I think a lot of these are just the tip of the iceberg at the moment. And the
Exactly.
more we're having, hopefully bringing to light that this area of our women's lives or midlife women's health needs a lot more research because it's been neglected for so long. And so that's the other kind of push, I think, to make sure women are engaged in this process and policy changes that impact women's health in general. So those are great points that it's never a yes, no answer. It's a well, maybe, and there's a lot of factors.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot. There
Yeah,
isn't a clear like, oh, cause and effect yet, you know.
exactly. Yep. No, that's great. I think it's a big message to not be afraid and to gather as much information as we can and to make the best informed decision at this time. Moving into some of your community-based intervention work, I think is just absolutely fascinating. So, looking at some of our interventions that we have for women, and so what cultural beliefs or traditions have you found to be protective or empowering for women during this specific time?
I mean, in one of my focus groups, someone said information is power. So
Mhm.
I think as the message is information. And, you know, it's always where we get information. And because there's a lot of misinformation as well. So making sure that you're getting your information from adequate sources. In terms of making that accessible, we still need to make menopause education and menopause information accessible to people across like different languages, different like education levels and health literacy. So I think that's and people are now, you know, accessing information differently. So even in some of when we've asked women, we've asked, you know, how do you prefer to receive information? Some people, you know, like, you know, podcasts versus reading. Other people like to read. Other people like classes, you know, group kind of sessions and things like
Mhm.
that because of the social support and being able to talk it out with others and hearing the experience of others. And I think that's what we're also seeing with like people who like blogs and things like that. But then again, it's being careful not to get misinformation in those scenarios because that can
Exactly.
happen. One of the other things, particularly for the groups that I've worked with, mostly Latinas, is that a lot of the women want like family based interventions.
Oh, yep.
Yes, there are certain conversations that they want to have with other like women who have like a shared experience, but they do also want like family members to be involved in some sort of intervention so that their family members can understand more about menopause and can provide some sort of family support, even if they would go to like visits with providers and things like that. We've tried thinking through a lot of our interventions are more lifestyle behavioral. So it's been nutrition, physical activity, menopause education, and stress management. Stress management is another one of those things where different people prefer different methods. And so I know for some of the women in my interventions, again, that, you know, were Latina did not like when we try like mindfulness interventions or something like
Mhm.
that. And so you kind of have to see feel out what people like. And that just goes by asking them, asking the
Yep.
community, the people that you want to invite into interventions, what are their preferences? Because some people, you know, would like different things. We've done culturally tailored recipes when you're thinking through about nutrition. So what you typically would cook and what is available, you know, what ingredients you have available to you, and then how to make them healthier. So I think that those are a lot of what we've done, and it has to do a lot with just asking people what they prefer. That's the
Mhm.
easiest way to
Yeah.
try to get people to do, you know, make some changes because it's hard. Like
Yeah.
any type of behavior behavioral change is hard, and it's going to be harder if you're asking someone or you're presenting a change that you won't do. I am not a runner. So please, if we're doing a physical activity intervention, do not assign me, running. We have to figure out what else to do.
And I think that's so important, I think, as well, because behavior change is so hard. I mean, it just for anybody. But I think it's so important to understand there are so many modes of getting information. Number one, is it internet, like you said? Is it group settings? Is it a podcast? Is it you're reading a pamphlet or a packet? I don't know. You know what I mean? That's one aspect of it. And then the second part is exactly what do you want to have for an intervention? And then how was that delivered to you? Do you want it in person? Do you want it online? It's so many things to consider, but I love that. I like the co-design approach. And you've talked about that quite a bit as well. And I think that that's something to consider, I think, too, as health systems are trying to figure out what's the best way to provide more information to the masses in a way, or people to access resources on their own if they so choose to do that as well. But I think the co-design approach is the best because you have to ask a lot of different people different ways to approach this. And the misinformation part scares me tremendously because I think I read a study. It was a report on a preventative women's health study that they had done. And I can't remember the exact statistic of the number of people that believed they're a health influencer online over their health provider. I was shocked. I was like, what? That is, so combating some of that is a tremendous leap in and of itself as well. And there's health influencers that you can just open up Instagram in any moment, especially around menopause and midlife women's health right now, to be very mindful of. Do you have any suggestions or how we can start to, or what you would say to a patient? I found this online and this is what the health influencer said.
I know.
I sometimes feel stuck,
yeah. I mean, I know. Well, and this does happen. Like if I give a workshop and someone says, well, I read this and I'm just like, or saw a video about this. And I'm like, where did you read it? Or who was it that said it? I try to tell people there's a few things, but one is I try to give people like the different sources that they could go to. So, if you have like the patient handouts from the Menopause Society or different handouts from like the NIH had some, information. I'm trying to think, Women Living Better, like just different sources where you can kind of see versus there. I know I'm kind of trying to step away from saying this, but it's like,
I know.
I'm like, if someone's selling you something, a lot of the times it's people that are trying to sell you stuff like that you gotta kind of think about what they're getting out of it versus like publicly available information sharing. I don't know.
Yep.
I was trying to say it differently, but that kind of is how I feel about some things, especially now. So I think thinking about trusted sources of people who are really invested in education of others, trying to share the information that is out there or the research versus that.
No, I think it's great advice, I think too, because, people struggle and I read this and or it just scares the heck out of them. And they say, well, this person took this and they did this. And especially around the whole idea of, do you want to do menopause hormone therapy or not? Or just, lots of questions. And so I think finding those trusted sources is a great way to start, and then asking your provider. Yeah, no, that's great advice. Kind of jumping into the policy realm, and I think around women's health, it seems to be shifting and changing at the given moment right now, specifically around funding and those that are kind of in academic roles. But despite menopause, the impact it's on half the population, and I think I looked it up before we started, it was, what did I say? Fine, that it was 1.2 billion, that's a B, billion, by 2030 will be in menopause or postmenopausal stages. That's like over half the population. Let's just put it that way, very, very simply, but often left out of that health policy discussions. So what changes would you like to see most in the national and or the workplace, which we've realized doesn't have a lot of menopause support resources around midlife women's health?
So let me start with workplace and then move.
Sure.
In terms of workplace policies, I do think it's important. I do see that there are, at least the conversation now it has started. And so hopefully we'll be seeing some more people with workplace recommendations, because during the menopause, when women are transitioning through menopause, this is like, for many women, when they have reached, certain, leadership levels at work or are productive. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword, because you don't want it to seem as if like, oh, women are not productive when they're transitioning. No, you're highly productive. You have immense experience. You have reached a certain level of productivity in your job. So what the workplace needs to do is try to retain their employees as much as possible and provide just like different accommodations when you're experiencing different other things and different things in life, such as do you need a fan at work? Do you need, like, if you're at a job where you have a uniform and potentially the material of that uniform might irritate or trigger certain symptoms, then, adjusting that, certain like bathroom breaks or other types of accommodations that you might need just to retain your employees and keep them being productive and providing for you. Like, I think that that's what the main thing would be in workplace policies. In terms of national, I think there's a lot. I think more in terms of health insurance coverage for different therapies. And then also, and this goes actually hand in hand with like the need for more funding for research, because there are other like non-hormone or other types of therapies that may not be FDA approved yet for certain, menopause symptoms. And so I think those are some of the things that we need to investigate more. Is more of the research so that we can also push along some of these other management strategies. But then also the other part of that would be the training of more providers to better care for individuals that are transitioning through menopause. And it's multiple, like different types of providers. It's not just physicians or nurses and nurse practitioners. It's also like mental health providers or anyone who will encounter a midlife woman.
Exactly.
At some point in their care, better understanding the changes that occurred during, midlife and the menopause transition.
Yep, absolutely. And I've been focusing a lot around pain at midlife transition, because I don't think that's very well studied. But I think a lot of women are seeking physical therapy or occupational therapy because things are not working as what they had before. They're experiencing a flare up of something. And so even I think physical therapists need to have additional training as well. And so that's a multifaceted approach to a major problem. And I was so hopeful with some of the executive orders with the previous administration around women's health, specifically women's health research. And so hopefully some of that will continue to move forward, I think. And I know the NIH, the Office of Women's Health Research, has done a nice job revising their website. And I think they do have a section on menopause in there as well, which is something to take a look at. So I hope more women's health resources will become available, specifically through funding and then the policy to follow as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. Thank you. So I think looking ahead as an educator and someone in academia, we have PhD students or undergraduate students. And so really looking ahead to, as you said, talking about training that next generation of leaders in research and in education. And so what do you hope the next generation of nurses or researchers or policymakers, how will they approach menopause and midlife health differently than maybe how we were exposed to it up through now?
Well, I think now at least we are having these conversations about training and providing more information. And so hopefully people are hearing about it earlier and thinking about it more, because we do need more providers in the next generation to better understand the transition. And we do need more researchers also to focus on midlife women. So I'm hopeful that now we're at that point where we're seeing that, and I hope to see that push continue. And then I think also some of the other things that we've discussed in terms of how it is multifaceted, and we need kind of like everyone on board collaborating to kind of enhance midlife women's health. It's kind of because we know that, it's not only at midlife, it's and beyond. So if you enhance
Absolutely.
it sets you up for that trajectory.
Yep. And I think too, that part of this podcast, I was really wanting to get some of this information and research out to the public sooner, because I don't think a lot of times, sometimes nursing research doesn't reach the masses, mass public as much. And so to really shine a light on how do patients or those in midlife women get involved in understanding more about what's happening in the research space and being engaged in that part of it to say, hey, this is questions we have. Is this potentially a research study or question that we could be asking, and kind of, again, that co-design approach. But the other aspect I'm super excited about is how providers are wanting more information as well to help individuals. But then also, how can we partner better as those of us doing the research and also those of us that are out in clinical practice? Because a question I may have as a researcher isn't going to fly in clinical practice at all, or that's just not what they're interested in or what patients are really asking. So I think being able to have those better partnerships across will help to inform, again, a lot of the practice and things and how to move the science forward as well.
I agree.
Yeah. Wonderful. And so one piece of advice would you give to every woman entering her 40s and 50s to prepare for a vibrant and empowered life?
Don't be scared. And when I give some like menopause education workshops, I always have to at the end say, okay, I presented a lot of information of the changes that may occur. Please do not be afraid. I think it is about what we've been talking about, information seeking, and that there are certain things that are in our control in terms of different things that we can start earlier with our lifestyle changes. That, okay, we know that I can't say it's a cause and effect. Oh, if you eat well and exercise, you will not experience. No, I can't say that, but but we do know that in general, you do want to set yourself up for being healthier so that you can have, a better trajectory in terms of your health at midlife and beyond. And that you will still experience certain symptoms. Everyone experiences something different for different duration of time. So each person's experience will be different, but seek information. Let's try to implement some of these changes earlier, because at least those are some things that we can control and that we feel like are in our control and we feel better. And then being able to seek out providers. And we do have like menopause certified providers, and you can find them on the website of the Menopause Society. And we do need more providers that are menopause certified, but there are some that you can seek out as well within your area. So those would be some of the tips I have.
This has been so great to have this conversation with you, and really great insights. And I think it's finding the information that works for you in little snippets of time will I think help. Knowledge is power. Absolutely. So thank you again for your time today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on this episode of Midlife Unmasked. I hope you found inspiration and a few key takeaways. If today's episode resonated with you, please be sure to share it with someone else that could also benefit. And don't forget, this podcast is here for you. If you have a topic or a question you'd like us to explore, please send it our way. Your feedback helps us reach even more listeners on this shared journey. You can find us on social media and our website, midlife-unmasked.com. That's midlife-unmasked.com. And the links are also in our show notes. Until next time, keep unmasking your potential, embracing the possibilities, and living your best midlife with courage and confidence. Take care and see you next week.